There was, stunning admissions over at ABC, wild over stunning new Trump admission. Well, it turns out not to be the case. And on top of that, we even have more information about it. Because, as you look at all of this and you go back to what the president has said in the past, the president was very clear. And that his original explanation, I don't think this, taken from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken it the meeting. This was July 13, 2017. They can't even keep up with their own hysteria. Anyway, Gregg Jarrett, his brand new book is out. The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton, frame Donald Trump. David Schoen, civil liberties, criminal defense attorney. Welcome both of you to the show. It just highlights everything I've been saying about the media, Greg, is that every second, minute, hour, day, month, year, week, this is it. This is what we get.
Well, and even the New York Times today, in their stories, made the bald-faced claim that it is illegal to receive help from a foreigner. Well, that's just not true. The Federal Campaign Election Act specifically says foreign nationals may volunteer their services to a campaign. That includes providing attending meetings and speaking. So it was never a crime. I heard George Stephanopoulos say, well, it's conspiracy to defraud the government. Well, did he ever read the U.S. Supreme Court decision on conspiracy to defraud? It requires craft, trickery, deceit, and dishonesty. How is sitting in on a meeting with a foreign national who's going to provide information, who didn't provide information, conspiracy to defraud?
Hey, Greg, how many times now? I went back this weekend and I looked at the dossier, or the accumulation of these papers that were written by Christopher Steele that Hillary paid for using Russian sources. And I'm laughing as I'm reading it, which is something you've often said you did when you've read it many times. And what does it talk about in the dossier? It talks about salacious details of Donald Trump. Never verified, never corroborated, and now debunked. Who paid for that Who paid for those Russian lies that ultimately became the bulk of information for a FISA warrant?
Hillary Clinton and Democrats and the FBI. We've learned over the last several days that the FBI was paying Christopher Steele at the same time Hillary Clinton was paying Christopher Steele.
We know this for sure. They were paying. Yes. How much did we pay them? The taxpayers paid for it?
The FBI started paying in January of 2016, 11 payments in 10 months. They admonished Christopher Steele. We don't know what for. That's redacted.
Do we know how much he got paid, 11 payments?
We don't. It's all redacted. And there's no justification for redactions. So, here is a guy who admit in his court papers in Great Britain that his documents are unverifiable. And yet the FBI, which knew all of this and couldn't corroborate any of it, used it anyway. And that's a violation of FBI regulations.
All right, let me go to David Schoen. David, let me move on to a different topic. Let me play you Jay Sekulow from the weekend. And I agree with this, and that is that if Mueller subpoenas the president, we're going to take this fight to the Supreme Court, which is the right choice.
What happens if Mueller then subpoenas the president?
You have a fight under the Constitution, because it really becomes an Article 2 question. So what would happen is if, and I say if, because we have no basis to know that at this point that a subpoena would be filed. And by the way, interviews can still happen. There could be written questions. There's other ways this can happen. The president may decide at the end he's going to not take his lawyer's advice. That's up to him at the end of the day. He's the president. He gets to make that decision. We're going to give our advice. But I think, look, if you get a subpoena, you file what's called a motion to quash. That will be argued at the district court. Then it would go to the Court of Appeals. Then it would go to the Supreme Court of the United States. From the Supreme Court of the United States, it goes back down to the lower courts again. So if the special counsel makes a determination and gets the authority, and that's a question, they have to have the authority to seek that subpoena. A subpoena for live testimony has never been tested in court as to a president of the United States, and there's a lot of language, articles, and precedent against that. But if that decision is made, we'll prepare to handle it in court. All
right, this has been an issue of major discussion in the country. I don't think the president should do a thing. Maybe a couple of answered written questions at most, but I would have a hard time justifying that considering the illegitimacy of the investigation. But maybe to move the country along, maybe for the sake of the country, you might do it.
I've taken absolutist position on this. I have from day one. I always will. The president should not dignify this illegitimate, quote, investigation, close quotes, with ever sitting down with the Mueller team. I hear Mr. Giuliani and others say, well, if it's only a short period of time, if it's only about this, if he doesn't ask about obstruction, there's no way to win with that. He shouldn't answer a single question, written or oral. And if he begins down that road, if he answers a question, they'll try to make something false out of that answer. And if he says, has a parameter, they won't take questions on obstruction of justice, he doesn't gain anything. Everyone's going to say, not everyone, people with an agenda will say, oh, you see, he must be afraid of obstruction of justice. This should be on the lawyers, not on Mr. Trump. I know that Mr. Trump is perfectly happy to answer the questions, and he would answer them fully. This is a lawyer's call. Jay Sekulow is right. Ultimately, it's the client's decision. But in this case, the lawyer should not even put that on the client. The lawyer should make clear that no lawyer worth his or her salt would allow the president to sit down with the Mueller team, end of story, and take the subpoena battle all day long. And it's not, it's not on the president to move things down the road. In this case, it's Mr. Mueller for causing this fight, if that's what they decide to do. And by the way, the president would be in very good company, including Jefferson and Adams, if he said something like, we're just far too busy with the business of the country to stop for this nonsense.
I think that's well said. And remember, he does, as Mark and all of you have said, and we have said, the Constitution is on the president's side here. For a lot of reasons is why you can't indict a sitting president. All right. And as we continue, Gregg Jarrett, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Russian Hoax, The Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton, Frame Donald Trump, David Schoen, civil liberties and criminal defense attorney. Let me get you to answer the same question. I know we've all talked about it, but now it's coming to a head. Gregg Jarrett, as it relates to any answers to any questions of Mueller, what does Jay Sekulow, Rudy Giuliani do and say?
They have to encourage their client, even though he wants to talk, not to talk. It's a perjury trap. Look what Robert Mueller did to Michael Flynn. Flynn was interviewed by FBI agents. Those agents concluded he told the truth. Manafort didn't care. Mueller didn't care. He charged Flynn anyway. So even if the president sits down in an interview and tells the truth, he runs the risk that Mueller will use other people's statements to accuse the president of lying.
What if it's written, and what if it's, in other words, and they have a chance? It doesn't matter. It's a perjury trap.
No. Yes, it's a perjury trap. And David's right. You cannot question a president for exercising his constitutional authority for firing Comey, nor is it a corrupt purpose, as the obstruction law demands, when he hopes or wishes that Michael Flynn is cleared. This was an illegitimate special counsel appointment. The law requires that there first be a stated crime. Look at the authorization order. There is no stated crime. This was an investigation in search of a crime, and that's the reverse of what the law requires.
Yeah. David?
You know what? Take one step back also. Gregg's absolutely right. And by the way, on the earlier questions, everyone has to read Gregg's book if you want to know the details of what's gone on so far in this case. But on this subject now, when the president has testified, take a step back. Does anyone on God's green earth honestly believe that Mr. Mueller wants to ask the president questions to find out information or answers and to then think, oh, you know what? I believe what he says now. Let's drop this thing. Does anybody in the world believe this is part of a fair investigation, an inquiry into facts? Absolutely not. Come on.
Yeah, well, I don't think it is. I don't think it's ever been. And I think especially now in light of what we all know about Hillary paying for Russian lies, Adam Schiff punked and pranked by Russian comedians, and literally looking for dirt on Donald Trump. I mean, this is what is so frustrating to me. And this is where the media is no friend to the American people in any way. All right. Thank you, because they don't tell the truth. Thank you both.